Or are we just ourselves today? No? Okay. We are on YouTube. Okay, that's excellent. And can I ask, please, in that case, whether we've got any apologies for the meeting?
Yes, Chairman, we've got apologies from David Smith and Guy Lonsdale.
Thank you. Okay, we are reminded here to make any declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary and prejudicial interests. So could members now declare any interests on the agenda and the nature of such interests? Members are reminded they can do it now or at any time during the proceedings. Do I have any declarations? No? Oh, okay, thank you. Right, we are being asked to approve the minutes of the board meeting held on the 6th of September. Now, I wasn't at that meeting, which was chaired by Guy, but I will ask, please, if we could look at matters arising and matters of accuracy, particularly for those who were there, Jane. On pages, well, do you want to take it as one? Have you got any issues? Okay, and any matters or updates that you would like to? Okay. Thank you very much. So those are approved. Pensions Committee. I attended this one virtually on the 1st of November. These minutes are for information. I don't know whether Councillor Wilkinson, there's anything you want to say on these minutes to draw attentions to?
Sorry, Chair. No, I don't think there's very much. If you were there, you'll know. One of the areas that is a constant recurring theme is the climate change related part of it. We're constantly having that brought up, and I know it's a really frustrating thing to some of the officers to have to constantly deal with the same thing over and over again. And I'm sure that will come up again. So as you notice, I think it was 4824 climate change related governance issues were brought up, and
yes,
on page 8, and this will be a recurring theme, unfortunately. Maybe I suppose we could ask if Tom could probably say something about the potential of the government mentioning about combining pensions yet again into larger and larger groups, and whether or not that he thinks there's any issue with that with us, because Border to Coast is quite large in its own right.
If we could come on to that point, Councillor Wilkinson, the governance developments are covered in item 7. But just to say, I think there is something in there, on climate change in the minutes. I think that part of that was the committee asked for some additional training on carbon literacy, and that's been arranged. It's going to be towards the end of February.
Sorry, Tom, I didn't mean to bring you up.
That's okay.
Could I just ask? I mean, training is always good and beneficial, etc. I'm just wondering why it's just the pension committee that are having that training. Is it appropriate and available to the board?
Well, we could certainly extend it to the board, Chair. I think I guess that the primary focus of this comes out of the council's resolution, and the council's resolution was for pensions committee members to consider carbon literacy training, and the carbon literacy training is largely focused on climate related issues as they affect organisations. But I think the interest from a committee's point of view is the extent to which it has any relevance to investments, which is not specifically a part of the remit of the board, but of course in terms of training and development, then you could say that it does have that. So I've just been finishing off arranging something this week with the climate change team at East Riding. There will be a number of places available for people if they would wish to attend, so we can certainly extend it to board members if you'd like.
If I may, Chair, it's 28th of Feb next year, so and it's I've already said I was going, and it'd be quite interesting as far as I'm concerned to actually see.
Thank you. Okay, can we note those items and move on to the pension fund annual report and accounts? Now, this has come a little bit out of timing, out of sync. And Tom, can you talk us through this report, and in particular the timescales on this?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So yeah, it's just a brief report summarising the position on where we are with the accounts and the annual report. Essentially, the accounts process has run relatively smoothly, but there have been some delays to it, as the report describes, largely as a result of national issues affecting council's accounts. And because the pension fund accounts are part of the council's accounts, that's impacted on us as well, and it's had a knock-on effect on the drafting and publication of the annual report. So there are no particular issues to bring to your attention in terms of what's in the accounts. That document's attached as Appendix 1, so I'm happy to take any questions on that. But what we do also have is Sharon Liddle from Forvis Mazars, who is joining us remotely, because Appendix 2 to this report is Mazars' audit completion report, and that has a few findings and recommendations in there. So perhaps if we could go to Sharon to say a few words about that.
Welcome, Sharon. Thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to start by and I'm sorry if I'm teaching anybody to suck eggs, by just saying that as auditors, there are two kind of opinions that we issue for the pension fund. One is an opinion on the pension fund financial statements that are included in the council's accounts, and the other is an opinion that goes in the pension fund annual report that says that the financial statements that are in the annual report are consistent with the financial statements in the council's accounts. With regard to the report that is included in the members' pack today, I think the most important piece of information is on page 149 of your pack, and that is that we anticipate issuing an unmodified opinion on the financial statements of the pension fund that are included in the council's accounts, and an opinion that will go into the annual report that says that we're satisfied that those financial statements are consistent with those in the council's statement of accounts. If we move on to page 151 of the pack, so that covers the outstanding work at the time that this report was written, and that's about 2.5 weeks ago now, perhaps 3 weeks. So there was one response outstanding on a level 3 investment. We've received a response from that fund manager. It's not quite what we wanted, but we have enough to be able to say that, you know, that will not impact on our opinion. IT procedures, they're now complete. They're just waiting a review from our side. Apologies, that third issue should not say IT procedures, it should say journals. Again, that's all complete and just subject to a final review by the partner, and then closure procedures, which are still ongoing, but that is because, as Tom alluded to, we can't give our opinion on the pension fund until the same point at which the council gets their opinion, and we can't give a final conclusion, if you like, on, for example, post-balance sheet events until the point at which we sign off those financial statements. On page 155 and 156 of your pack, that highlights the significant risks that we identified at our planning stage and the work that we've undertaken in order to provide assurance on those. And there's nothing, there were both bits of work ongoing on both of those when we issued this report, and there's nothing further come to our attention that needs to be brought to the attention of those charged with governance, which we would do in a follow-up letter as a result of the work that we've completed. Page 160 to 164, as Tom mentioned, includes deficiencies in internal control that we've identified during the audit, and that also includes management responses to those issues that have been flagged. Pages 166 to 168 include a summary of misstatements. The first two are unadjusted misstatements, and I'd like to say there's been no adjustments to the fund account and net asset statements, or no adjustments to those primary statements. And the unadjusted misstatements occur because of timing differences. They occur every year, and that's because when we do our audit, the fund managers are able to provide information that is more up to date than information that's provided to officers when they're preparing the draft financial statements. So that's not unusual or unexpected. And then page 168 includes a summary of misstatements that have been made to disclosures within the financial statements. And the most significant one of those is the first one, and that relates to a reclassification of investments from level 1 to level 2 relating to 4 border to coast pooled funds. That's as much as I was going to say, but obviously I am happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I have a question. Oh, go on, Councillor Wilkinson. Okay. My question is on page 157, and I'm just wondering if you can put some context around the description and narrative under significant difficulties during the audit.
Yeah. It's very difficult. So what we have to do as part of our audit procedures to get assurance on the level 3 investments, which are obviously those hard to value investments, we write to a sample, and it is a large sample of fund managers, and we request certain information from them. Excuse me. And the situation is improving every year. I'd like to make that clear. But there were 1 or 2 fund managers where they were just very slow in getting the information back to us, and we had to chase several times. And as I've said in the note, in the report, management have also, they're in the loop with that, and they've also been trying to liaise with these fund managers in order to expedite that procedure, but that's what that relates to.
And would you anticipate that there was any more that we could or should have done in that respect?
I don't, to be honest, I don't think so. As I say, we were chasing them with several emails, and Tom's team were also very active in asking them to come back to us. So from my perspective, I'm not quite sure what else could be done. I don't know if Tom and his team have another perspective, but to my mind, there was nothing else that could have been done.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Okay. Question from Tom.
I was just going to say, Chair, I think, you know, it's just an iterative process dealing with these external managers. I mean, often the funds that these managers manage are domiciled in places like Luxembourg, where they deal with a variety of investors, public sector, private sector, some in the UK, most around Europe, some elsewhere, and encouraging them to be more accommodative to us in terms of our requests. It is something that has been improving year on year, but some of them have been much quicker to react and are much more helpful and responsive than some others. And I think this is just a situation that we are going to continue to face, but hopefully every year it does get a bit better.
Presumably we're not the only ones of finding problems like that. Thank you.
No, not at all.
Councillor Wilkinson, you had a question.
No, thank you. It's with hindsight, it'd be more appropriate to speak to Tom later during the discussions on the question that I had. So.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from anyone on the accounts? No? Thank you. Tom, can you just outline where this now goes and the process that we will follow with this then?
Yes, Chair. So the next steps is we're expecting the audit of the accounts, which form part of the council's accounts, to be finalised shortly. After that, Sharon and the team will be able to complete the audit on the annual report. So the accounts process is under the remit of the audit committee, the council's audit committee. So our pensions committee isn't involved in the approval process as such. But what we do ask the committee to approve is the annual report. So once the accounts have been finished, we'll then make sure that they are appropriately reflected in the annual report so that Sharon and the team can issue their audit report. We'll then take that back to the committee to their meeting on the 31st of January and ask for their approval, following which we will publish the final version on the website, and then that's job done.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for attending as well. I hope it's a lot more warm and sunny wherever you are than where it is here in East Riding.
Oh, you're perfectly welcome. But I am in Sunderland, so no, it's not.
Oh, thanks very much. You're very
Okay,
welcome
bye-bye.
to stay for the rest of the meeting or to leave us if you wish to move on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Okay, so we're on now to item 7, which is the local government pension scheme regulations and governance update. And Lisa, I believe you were speaking to this item.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is the purpose of this report is to update the board on recent developments within the local government pension scheme, regulatory environment and wider industry, as well as any recent consultations issued that would have a significant impact on the fund. And it's recommended that the board notes the content of this report. It's quite a lengthy one, so apologies for that. Under McLeod, section 4, I think I provided a verbal update on this at September's meeting, but I've just confirmed here in this report at 4.3 that MHCLG laid the LGPS regulations 2024 at the end of August. They came into effect from the 23rd of September 2024 with backdated effect to the implementation of the McLeod remedy. So that removed the requirement to include the estimated underpin information in the 2023-24 annual benefit statements. So there was no requirement to report that breach because we didn't breach the regulations. These regulations also provided a discretion not to include estimated underpin information in next year's statements for a particular member or class of members. So authorities using this discretion will have to decide and notify affected members before the date for annual benefit statements to be provided next year, i.e. the 31st of August. So we're waiting to find out if there'll be further guidance on the circumstances in which it might be appropriate to use that discretion. I'll give a thorough run through now of what Councillor Wilkinson was asking about earlier with regard to the pensions review. So in section 6, 6.4 is where I will start. So on the 14th of November 2024, the government set out its vision for the future of the LGPS. Details of the proposed future for the LGPS can be found in the Mansion House speech, which we can share if you've only got a paper copy of the papers. The Mansion House speech was very quickly followed by the Pensions Investment Review interim report and a consultation, the LGPS Fit for the Future consultation. Most of the information that's relevant is set out directly in there, but it does contain 18 proposals under 3 specific areas of pooling, local investment and governance of funds and pools. And I have given a summary of them here, so I will just talk through them. So under pooling, they're looking to set minimum standards for investment pools, including a requirement to pool all assets by March 2026, including legacy private market investments, full delegation of investment implementation strategy to the pool. Pools are to provide strategy advice to administering authorities, and they'll also be required to be authorised and regulated by the FCA. So Tom might want to add some to this afterwards, but I'll just continue to run through the rest of the proposals. Under local investment, setting target ranges for local investment, working with relevant authorities to identify local opportunities with the idea that pools will then carry out the due diligence on those opportunities and make decisions on whether to invest in them. And then there was also the proposals under the governance as well of pools and funds, which mostly follow in line with the good governance recommendations. So having minimum requirements for training for committee member knowledge and skills. And lots of the other recommendations are also included, such as the appointment of a senior LGPS officer and a biennial independent governance review as well. Also some requirements around representation and transparency of pools and a requirement for funds to appoint an independent advisor to committees. So a working group comprised of several partner funds from border to coast has been established, and this group's considering the implications of the proposals and putting together a draft response, which will be suitable to be tailored by each of the partner funds. The deadline is quite tight. It's the 16th of January. I don't know if Tom wants to add anything more on that.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. So on the consultation response, I've been working with representatives of the other 10 partner funds in Border to Coast and Border to Coast themselves on a response, a collective response that all partner funds could effectively sign up to from the perspective of the joint committee. But we would also expect to submit our own response from a East Riding specific point of view, because there are some issues in the consultation document which are more relevant for us in our circumstances, whereas others we'd be more relaxed with. We have got a meeting planned with Border to Coast, I think, next week to talk about what will be the kind of second draft of a response. So it's been kind of batted around between partner funds to make sure that it's, telling the right kind of story from us. But I think, in general, there are quite a lot of potential changes proposed, but from the position that we're in, where we've already pooled around 70% of our assets, we're already in quite a strong position. So one of the things, as an example, the consultation talks about all of the pooling of investments being within an FCA regulated company. Now, Border to Coast is an FCA regulated company, so we don't need to do anything to comply with that. But some of the other pools don't have that structure, and it would take probably a year to create that structure with that approval. Following which, it would then take a number of years to create the fund structure that it currently exists within Border to Coast in those other pools. So when the consultation is talking about potential transfers of assets by certain deadlines, it's quite clear that for some pools this would just be completely impossible. So I think the consultation is to some extent setting out what we think government's requirements are going to be, but also it's kind of throwing out some questions for pools to individually respond to. So, I think it is quite a short period for the consultation process. I think it was 9 weeks, but 2 weeks over Christmas effectively means it's really only 7, and we're already several weeks into that. But I think we're quite confident that we'll have a sensible response to provide to government, and then we'll see whether they're listening.
I think from my point of view, it was very helpful to have shared at the Joint Committee of Border to Coast around the table, person by person view on where these proposals stroke questions, given that, as I think the Chief Executive of Borders to Coast pointed out, nearly all start with, do you agree that, as opposed to what do you think? I think it was extremely helpful to know where we are positioned as a pooled fund, and where the pool itself relates itself to other pools. Clearly, there are some structural and some operational issues there if some of the perceived developments from that review go forward. I found it very reassuring that from Tom that it's going to be a gradual change as opposed to a structural change. My concern is that we do need to get some communication ready, because I think certainly in terms of what's going on in the media at the moment, with employers and members' views, and certainly in terms of the responsible investment strategy and the local investment strategy, where we actually invest our resources, I think is increasingly coming under the microscope. I think from officers' point of view, I think we realise that you may not have the brightest of Christmases with all this consultation and work going on with policy, and we thank you for your detailed and your time that's going into this. It's good to know that we're going to be there at the table putting our views forward, whatever that might mean, and whatever the take-up of that going to be. And we thank you for the work that you're doing. In terms of members, will we be actually seeing the submission, and will it be going to committee before the East Riding submission is authorised? Because again, timescales are very tight, aren't they?
Yes, they are very tight, Chair. So the intention is to pull together a draft East Riding response and circulate it to the Pensions Committee and circulate it to the board too. I mean, obviously, given the kind of the nature of kind of pulling a response together like that, I think what we're kind of really be looking for is whether there are any particularly problematic areas that, from a board or a committee point of view, rather than, you know, we could all have an opinion on quite how we respond to each element. So that's what we intend to do, and make sure we get the response in by the deadline. Just on another point that you mentioned, Chair, I think one of the problems with the consultation process like this is, at the moment, there are so many kind of what if questions that we don't really know what the government is going to say. And I think we have to be a little bit careful about not spending too much time and trying to second guess what that might look like. And that was kind of exemplified by, on the morning of the Mansion House speech, the government decided to publish a brief document about what was coming in the Mansion House speech and in the pensions review. And that talked about there being, you know, the focus on pool and fund mergers. And there was a lot of discussion on the radio with various experts talking about why they thought this was a good thing or a bad thing. I circulated something to the committee to say, just, you know, this isn't maybe quite what we were expecting, but just hang fire a bit before, let's wait to see what they really say. And it turned out that there was barely a mention of it, anything like that, in the Mansion House speech. On the pensions review itself, it talked about much more about what are the next steps for our current pooling journey, rather than really anything to do with pooling or mergers at all. So all of that fuss and discussion that was created during that day largely went away. Now, the government are clearly still interested in mergers and of funds of pools to some extent, but I think that they are becoming aware of how much that would take away from all of the effort that's been made on terms of pooling investments. Because I think, you know, one thing that I think seems to, you know, everyone recognises is, when you talk about, you know, merging two funds, the biggest issue by far of that is to do with the administration side. It's got nothing to do with investments at all. And we're already pooling assets in 8 pools in a way that government wanted a few years ago, and what they seem to be, they're largely supportive of that approach, as long as we can achieve further economies of scale. So I'm doubtful that mergers of pools and funds will really go anywhere, but at the moment we don't really know. And I think in terms of next steps, although the consultation closes on the 16th of January, we don't know how long it's going to be before government are going to publish some kind of response to that. I think what we are expecting is that regulations will be included in the Pensions Act, which is going to be published, we believe, possibly in the summer, but knowing how things tend to work, more likely after the summer recess, so sometime in the autumn, following which there'll be some guidance around the regulations. So it's probably going to be a year from now, or possibly more, before we really know what the rules around the next steps are going to be. So, you know, we need to be prepared for what's coming, and we'll keep talking to our partners on these developments, but there are so many unknowns at the moment.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And that reminder of not over-investing time in a response, given the uncertainty of the direction, is a good one. I think the other thing to mention is to pick the themes, because clearly through things like the good governance review, etc., there are themes, aren't there, about transparency coming through, and about, you know, direction, detail and accountability that we can pick up and work on, and are working on anyway. So thank you for that. Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just have 2 small points, and I think bearing in mind what Tom's just said, is that what is the response that we're going to put, or what type of view on the response you're going to put to the government suggesting that we should have local targets for local investment. And how does that reconcile with our fiduciary duty to ensure that we actually make the best return for the safest? And secondly is I noticed is about 2.25 billion still not pooled, and I understand, obviously, having sat on the committee, why. But when do we see it, starting to move into the pooling process as a whole?
Yeah, so on the first point, yes, there is something of a conflict between local investment and fiduciary duty, and this has always been the case in terms of anything local. So the committee's primary goal is to make sure that we get the returns that we need to pay the benefits. If that's kind of compromised in a way by investing on a different basis, whether it's on an ethical basis or whether it's on a local basis, where often local investments are focused more on the economic value they might derive or the social benefit they might derive rather than financial benefits, then there is potentially a conflict. That doesn't mean local investments can't be found that would fit the pension fund's purpose, but I think government seems to have an expectation that a lot of pension fund money will go into the local economy through this route. I guess that an issue for us has been there's never been a barrier to us investing locally. The problem is that the drivers for local investments, whether they are things that the council or mayoral authorities or other organisations would like to see, aren't the same as the view that we take from a pension fund's point of view, where we're looking to achieve a return. Now, there probably is some middle ground that could be found on this. But the challenge we've got from a pension fund point of view is that the government has ambitions on our behalf that pension fund money is invested locally. But we're not aware at the moment of government taking any action or taking a position to facilitate that. So, they'd like pension fund money to be invested locally. But that's a challenge for us to address. Now, in terms of setting local targets, I suppose it depends what local targets look like. A target of between 0 and 10% could be quite easily achieved. So, and how we report on that, I think we've talked to our partner funds about how we report on that, and it feels like it makes a bit more sense, whether it's on local investing or on carbon, to report it at a pool level rather than have 11 separate reports. Mm. So, we are considering that. So what was your second question, Councillor? Oh yes, so most of the vast majority of the money that's not pooled is held in private markets investments, and say a typical private equity investment might have around, say, a 12 to 15 year life. You effectively commit money into that investment, and you can't take the money out. But towards the end of the lifetime of that fund, your investments will reap their rewards, and you'll get the money back to the fund. It's kind of drip fed back to the fund. As that money's coming back, we're then reinvesting that money into Border to Coast. But clearly, given the kind of the lifespan of these private markets funds, that's going to take a number of years. So we've already done quite a lot of that, and I think, as previously reported to the board and the committee, I think we've got outstanding commitments of over £1 billion into Border to Coast already, and we'll continue to do more of that. There is something in the consultation document about private markets investments being under pool management. So that's kind of slightly different approach that we've seen before. So on the one hand, we can transfer equity investments to Border to Coast because it's obviously there's a market for those. You can they're easy to move in to the pool by buying and selling. But as far as the private market's concerned, often the legal structures for these private markets investments are such that it's either impossible to transfer them, or it's incredibly expensive and complicated to do that. But in theory, Border to Coast could have some kind of oversight role over our private markets investments. So depending upon what comes out of the consultation, I'm sure that's something that will be explored. That has some parallels to some passive equity investments. Now, we don't have any of those, but some of the partner funds do. So they invest money with Legal and General in passive funds. Those investments have stayed with Legal and General, but Border to Coast has an oversight role in relation to those investments. So they're classified as pooled, even though the money hasn't moved. And the reason that hasn't moved is because it's just there's no economic benefit in moving it, because even though government are keen for us to transition as much as we can into the pool, one of the most important things we need to think about is, well, what's in the best interest of the fund, and is all we're doing just adding a layer of costs by moving it into a pool? So, you know, it has some parallels with that, but I think, you know, once we know what the outcome of the consultation is, we'll decide how we're going to tackle it. But I think just the point I mentioned earlier about the progress that we've made with Border to Coast, you know, we've pooled about 70% of our assets. That's a little bit above average across all of the Border to Coast funds. There are some other pooling arrangements that pooled a number that's much closer to zero. And of course, there are some pooling arrangements that haven't created the government's desired FCA regulated entity. So, you know, whatever comes out of the consultation process, we're well ahead of the game in a way. So, you know, hopefully that will kind of help us in terms of what the next steps might be.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. You look like you want to add something.
We did just want to add a little bit about something that didn't make it into the report, if that's okay, about the Department for Education guarantee. Liz is going to just mention that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to mention something that's probably a little bit better news for the fund actually than some of the other items that we're reporting on. And that was just to say that it's been ongoing for a little while that the way that colleges are treated in the pension fund, and that's because college bodies, FE bodies, posed a greater risk to the pension fund because of they didn't have any guarantee, they had no government backing, no guarantees, no tax raising powers. And so for several years, really, for quite a long time, they've been treated differently to other bodies, and this had become an issue that the government were very much aware of and were addressing. Anyway, so last month we received a notification from the government that the college guarantee is now in place. It is limited to £32 million sort of as an outset sort of figure, but that can be extended and approved to a higher level with the Secretary of State's approval. So this is a material change really for our colleges. It's quite a significant change, and in our perspective, it's certainly welcomed by officers of the fund, and it would be difficult for us to do nothing at this stage. So what we're proposing is we're going to have a conversation with Hymans about looking at sort of the covenant risk of these employers and seeing if we can do a mid-valuation review for our colleges who are in the pension fund. So it was really just to let the board members know that that we are hoping to be able to move with that, and that's probably something that we're going to do between now and the next board meeting, is to start that process for our colleges who are still actively contributing to the fund to review their contribution rate.
It's good news, thank you. Can you just advise, is that including universities? Because we do have, it's just colleges, not universities.
Yeah, the guarantee is just for further education bodies and not higher education in universities.
Okay,
there is a little bit of clarification surrounding some elements of it. And Hymans have said that that's something they're working with central government on. So I think that there was going to be a meeting with all actuaries to discuss the outcome of this new guarantee, clarify some of the areas that were a bit unsure. They were going to have that meeting with central government shortly, very soon.
right.
So
Okay.
yeah.
Can I also ask, just what is the appetite from employers to understand and be aware of what's going on in terms of the structural and administrative actual and proposed changes in the pension fund? Neil's laughing.
We haven't seen any interest so far, but obviously that doesn't mean that it won't come. I think from a member point of view, this won't affect them, shouldn't affect them at all. I guess, in theory, a change in administration arrangements could do, but we're not actually really expecting that to happen. It's not to say that these things don't change. So, recently, Tyne and Weir have won the contract for providing administration services for the Teesside Pension Fund. But, these changes are few and far between. Previously, Teesside Pension Fund outsourced their administration arrangement to a private sector provider anyway. So, this is a little bit different to LGPS funds that have their own in-house arrangements. So from a member point of view, that's probably something that would be more notable, but at the moment we don't see any of that coming. I think from an employer point of view, they quite how the money is invested and quite what the governance arrangements are of the fund doesn't really impact on them. In the end, their interest is what their contribution rates are, and we, irrespective of what happens in the detail of pooling of investments, that won't affect them.
That's very helpful. Okay, so for the time being, there's other areas in which officers can focus their time and attention. Thank you for that. Okay, shall we move on to the next item, item 8? Right, this is the risk register. Lisa, are you taking us through?
I am, thank you, Chair. Yes, so this report presents the quarterly report to the board of the Pension Fund's Risk Register. The Risk Register has changed from the last quarterly report, and I will go through that in more detail. The Risk Register itself is attached to Appendix 1, and the record of breaches is attached at Appendix 2. The fund has recorded 7 new breaches of the law. These are, again, refunds of contribution payments made to scheme members beyond the expiry of 5 years from leaving active membership. And it's recommended the board consider the updated risk register, provide any feedback to assist the fund in identifying, managing and monitoring risk. So at 2.5, just an update on staffing. So the risk score for this has remained at an amber level. During Q2, the vacant principal pensions officer role, resulting from the recent assistant pensions manager appointment, was advertised, closed, and interviews took place in November. We have appointed Christine Webster to that post, so she now joins the office management team, and there have been no further changes within the office management team. 2.6, at the time of carrying out the review for writing the report, vacancies across the section were at 227 hours over 11 posts. But I just want to reassure you, we have made some appointments. And as at the 6th of January, we have some new people starting, and that will be down to 153 hours over 7 posts. So that's...
Can I just clarify? Do you mean the 6th of December? You don't mean the 6th of January, do you?
I do mean the 6th of January, yes. Yeah.
This year or last year?
2025, so in a month's time.
All right. Thank you.
Sorry. Yes, so we have made appointments. People have given the notice and they're due to join us in the new year. Yeah, so it will be much reduced down to 153 vacant hours over 7 posts at that point. So yeah, sorry if that was unclear. The time taken to advertise posts for the section has reduced, following the corporate leadership team decision that pension fund posts would no longer need approval to advertise in response to the request made by the board. So that's made a significant difference. The risk that has changed, risk number 4, regulatory changes are not implemented correctly. So at 2.9, I've outlined that we have increased that risk, and that now sits at an amber level. So the risk was assessed, and it was determined that the likelihood score for this risk should increase to a 3, which, if you look at the scoring matrix at 2.2, the description is the event will occur at some time. So following the implementation of the McLeod remedy, we have had delays in the software solution being updated to be able to administer benefits in accordance with these regulations. And again, with revisiting historic cases to recalculate those in line with the remedy. That's not something we've been able to do as quickly as we would have liked. We have followed statutory prioritisation guidance, and there is a working group to monitor progress with the project. We're on with testing the current software release, and we are expecting further functionality in the next release early in 2025 also. So we are making progress, just not as quickly as we would ideally have liked. And in addition, at 2.10, the guaranteed minimum pension rectification project has been delayed because resources have been needed in other areas, including the manual work needed for McLeod, preparing for dashboards, and the migration project for our software system. So this means we are aware some pensions do continue to be paid incorrectly because the GMP hasn't been rectified. And then at 3.2, I've already mentioned that the fund's recorded 7 breaches of the law, which are detailed in Appendix 2 of the report. Those are in respect of refunds of contributions paid beyond the 5-year deadline. But I'm happy to take any questions on anything from the risk register, if anybody does have anything.
Anybody got any questions? Okay. Couple of questions from me in that case. Firstly, risk lead is down as Julian. Can I ask if and when those details on page 196, if and when
Yes.
those
So
will...
at the time of putting together this report, Chair, it was before we had our new pensions manager in post. So I left the risk lead as our director of finance at that point.
Okay, so will those change to the pension manager? Those
They will, yes.
And when will that take account?
Well, it will on your next quarterly update. You will see it updated, but it will be done.
Thank
It will
you.
be done before then, as soon as
Thank
we look to review the register again.
Right. Thank you. And the second question is my usual question. Can you just confirm that those were not serious and reportable breaches, please?
Yes, that's correct. They're breaches that should be recorded, but as they're not material, they do not need to be reported to the regulator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Won't it be wonderful if we can actually just get the governance review to actually accept that we're acting in the best interest of members in this one and not have to constantly report this as a breach or discuss it as a breach, I should say. Okay, thank you. The other thing I would say is, I suppose I failed in my duty to welcome you, Liz, to your first board meeting as new pensions manager. So belatedly, I will say welcome back. The problem being that it just never felt like you'd been away, really. But I think one of the things that we have looked at as the board during your absence is taking some deep dives into risks. But given that we've got the single code coming in, there's the pensions review coming in, the dashboard, the McLeod, etc., do we need to look at our risks again and maybe take an overview of where we are?
Yeah, I'm hoping that very early in 2025 to do a full review of the risk register, and that will include I'd like to review sort of the criteria for impact to make sure that we're recognising the risk types and that we're considering the impact in accordance with the actual type of risk. And I'd like to look at the actual risks that we've got within the risk register and to ensure that we're up to date, really. And we might need to remove some risks, add some new ones. We might result in a few more risks, I think, especially during this significant time of change and challenge for the LGPS, especially with the governance and administrative roles that the fund plays. So I do intend to do a full review. It is possible that I think as part of that, I think it might be useful to set some time aside for a workshop for the board so that we can look at that. So if I have some proposals and bring them to the board, and then we can talk about you know, the deep dive process and how we want to make sure that the board is sort of getting a full picture of the risk at every quarterly review meeting and getting the opportunity to look at those risks in more detail. So yeah, so that is work that I'd like to do, and I expect to be able to do that very early in 2025 and possibly before the next board meeting.
Thank you. That just looking round table, I think that would be very helpful. Final question from me is on 2.8. We note the cybersecurity strategy is now in place. Am I right in assuming that's the council's cyber strategy as opposed to the pension funds?
I did check this out, and it is the pension fund cyber security strategy.
So we are now in place. Would the board be able to see that strategy?
I think that you probably have done at some point, but we can bring it again if that would be beneficial. Yeah, absolutely.
That would be very helpful. I think we had some time to discuss, and I think it may have been discussed at the end of maybe even last year. And it's one of these things that is an iterative process. We had a very helpful discussion, didn't we, from our corporate IT section? But it'd be quite good to just get an update on there. Thank you. So a further suggestion maybe for training. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Wilkinson.
Sorry, Chair, I was thinking about asking the question, but then you asked a similar one, and I was waiting to see exactly what you asked on the cybersecurity side, which was one of the areas I was looking at the risk register, which gives it as prior to putting in the mitigation measures, is that we were looking at a catastrophic issue with it, and even after that, we're still looking at it will occur at some time that we will have a problem with it. I suppose that is concerning when we're looking. I think the likelihood was between 1% and 5% of the fund's assets, which is kind of an awful lot of money, and was given that we are forecasting that even with our mitigation measures in place, we are going to have that occur. That is deeply concerning, and maybe, as the chair was asking, maybe we could review the cybersecurity and ensure that doesn't happen.
Just to confirm, I mean, one of the powers that the board may wish to look at is whether or not we actually commission an independent review, because the board needs to be satisfied that the funds within the scheme are not at risk from cybersecurity, and that the members are not at risk from cyber attack. So that is one of the things that could be available, and I think some schemes have actually operationalized that idea.
Yeah, I think one of the areas that maybe Tom would be able to confirm, but as most of our funds at the moment, 70% plus, are in border to coast, then I suppose it would be to ask Tom whether or not he's confident that border to coast cybersecurity is good enough as it's looking after our funds in real terms.
Yeah, we get annual reports from our investment managers, including border to coast, on their various control measures, which include cybersecurity. So these go to the committee and the board around about June, July time. So that's kind of part of the assurance that we get from them. But you know, it's their systems that are the most important. They're the ones that hold the assets. Now we obviously have our own internal systems, but most of what we use is actually web-based. So, for example, our custodian, everything that we do is all on a kind of web platform rather than us hosting anything directly. But you know, again, we get a controls report from our custodian as well, where you know they give us that evidence. So that's these control reports are all externally audited by one of the Big Four audit companies.
If I may ask a stupid question, but I don't think there's any stupid questions. So if the inevitable happened, as we were just discussing, that inevitably something will happen at some time, if the inevitable happened and Border to Coast got a breach and they, as an example, lost £50 billion, where do we stand? Is that a total loss? We all share that, or are we insured for that? What would happen in that case? Or don't you know in that?
I'd have to talk to them about the specifics, but I suppose in general terms, you know, they, you know, like any organizations had kind of IT issues, but they've got various backup arrangements, disaster recovery arrangements, and so on in place. So, you know, the risk that they've got is it's more to do with, it's just data effectively. And they've also got processes in place to, you know, detect when breaches have occurred and so on, and effectively, you know, they've got backups available if needed. So I can get you a kind of more complete answer after the meeting, Councillor Wilkinson, but, you know, I think Border to Coast's IT arrangements, you know, like, you know, any of our other managed arrangements, they're not kind of unique of themselves. And, you know, if there was a data breach issue that was so damaging as that, it's likely to be much more kind of widespread and more of a kind of, you know, a national or international issue. But I can get you a bit more detail on some of the specifics if you wish.
That's very kind. I mean, please don't go to a great deal of effort. It was just a thought, and I was kind of thinking back to, and obviously we've closed all those loops, but we're thinking back to where, do you remember the old Barings Bank that had the problem with a chap called Nielsen, I think his name was, which doesn't bode well for us, does it? This is our Section 151 officer.
I think that, yeah, I mean, and that's not the only issue like that that's occurred, but these are more of a kind of issues where individuals have been given too much leeway to operate on their own without an appropriate control environment around them. So, you know, Nick Leeson was a name that springs to mind as well. So, and these are the kind of things that, you know, Border to Coast and other asset managers have obviously, you know, they would otherwise say their arrangements are robust, but they've kind of obviously learned from some of these experiences in the wider market. And, you know, this is to make sure that, you know, no one individual is able to just go off and do things on their own without anyone realizing.
Thank you. It's an excellent time. And I think we just need to be mindful of that duality of the cyber security, because losing the assets, whatever that might mean, is one side, but equally the fines from the Information Commissioner of a data breach could be just as catastrophic. And certainly in terms of some of the fines that are coming, they're up there with the sorts of figures, you know, that you've actually talked about in terms of loss of assets. So Liz.
Yeah, it was just an observation and something that I think we'll pick up on when we're carrying out the full review anyway. The actual risk is that there is a failure to establish adequate cybersecurity controls and business continuity. So this is suggesting that those controls might not be in place. So taking into account the work that's been done by the fund over the last year or 18 months and the processes that are now in place, arguably we maybe should be looking at what is the likelihood of us not having those controls in place. Actually, that likelihood has now reduced. So this is not a risk that there will be a cybersecurity breach. This is a risk that the fund doesn't have in place the controls that are needed to manage an incident, and we do now have those controls in place. So on reflection, this is certainly a risk that I would suggest that we're reviewing and looking at the scoring when we look at the likelihood. So just to say that I think that's something we'll pick up.
No, thank you for that.
That's really helpful. Okay, we're filling up the calendar nicely here, aren't we? Okay, any more on the risk register? We're through with that one. Okay, so we're on to item 9, and Lisa, your report, please.
Yes, thank you. Me again. So this report provides East Riding Pension Board with a quarterly update on the administrative performance of the fund in respect of Q2 for the year, so the period 1st July to the 30th September. And it's recommended that the board notes the content of this report. Just a couple of things I want to pick out this time, really. So in section 3, number 3.3, the data and employee governance team have been working hard, data cleansing, particularly in advance of the pension regulator's annual scheme return, which was due on the 22nd of November, and it was submitted on time. The data scores that came out of this work provide a measure of the standard of the data held in terms of its validity and consistency, and the scores were high. The common data score came out at 99.85%, and the scheme-specific data score at 95.27. So these reflect the high standard of the data and the benefits of collecting data monthly, regular data cleansing, all the work that the fund are doing. And just a couple more things to pull out. Under section 5, I just wanted to highlight the high level of member communication that's still going on. So at 5.5, member inquiries have remained high, with 1,228 written or emailed inquiries and 827 online questions being asked during the quarter. So this is an increase from the previous quarter of 13.8 and 8%, sorry, 13 and 8% respectively. So we will continue to monitor this area of work with a view on how we might be able to deal with member contact more efficiently. At 5.9, the board did ask for a quarterly update now of uptake to the East Riding Pension Fund member self-service portal. So I will provide this on a quarterly basis now. At the 30th of September 2024, we had 36.5% of member records were registered to access the online portal, and we will monitor that take-up rate to make sure that our target of 50% remains appropriate. And we welcome board comments on whether that remains appropriate. Under section 7, member contact, so you'll note an increase in calls over this period, particularly for the member services team. So I just mentioned this at 7.2. So this year, for the first time, annual benefit statements were made available online only for all active and deferred members who hadn't opted out of the member self-service. So there has been an increase in calls to the section from members wanting to help complete the registration and get online to access that statement, or if they didn't want to access the service, for help to opt out of online communication. And this is also reflected in the average call durations, which you'll note were longer in Q2 than in the previous quarter. And the last point I just wanted to note, because it was discussed at the last meeting, was at 7.8 around the agreement for the provision of services, the draft agreement that was put together for the provision of the services by the customer service network to the fund. So we have had feedback now from the customer service network supervisors, decided not to provide you a copy of the agreement at this meeting because I was aware Liz was joining us very shortly, so I wanted to get her input on the agreement before we finalise that. So it will be with you. It will be with you as soon as possible. And that was it from me, unless anybody has any questions, which I am happy to take.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Do apologise. I just want to keep you on your toes, you know, ask questions. At 5.8, we mentioned the actual migration across from UPM to from Oracle in Basics to SQL. What? How is that going? Are we okay with that?
Yeah, it's all on track, and we have project meetings with Civica on a monthly basis, and we're on target with that. We've ironed out a couple of issues, yeah. So yeah, we're on track with that.
Good. I was just involved with one with a company just recently, so I know how complicated it is. So I just thought I'd ask that question.
Okay.
There's just one thing that I wanted to mention really from this report. Obviously, I've only been back in post for 5 days. But one of the things that I am keen to do, and I'm very much conscious of, is the continued increase in member contact that the fund continues to receive. Obviously, when I left the fund 17, 18 months ago, this was a concern, and it's probably been a concern now for at least 2 years, and it continues to increase. And I think that from an industry point of view, we're very much aware of the increase in the media. We've got pension dashboards that are really just around the corner when we're talking about in a time frame for the LGPS. It is imminent, and these are things we need to consider. So what I'm going to do is really really look overall at how we manage customer contact, how we make sure that we're resourced effectively to manage that. You'll note at 5.6 we've currently got 434 outstanding member queries. That's quite a significant number when you consider the size of the team to deal and respond to those queries and the complexity that some of those queries can involve. And we really do need to make sure that we're still able to deliver a very high level of service to all our members. So that's certainly an area that I'm going to be looking at. I'll be speaking to my colleagues and Julian and Darren about how we manage that, how we make sure that we're resourced effectively to manage this expectation and this new way really of the contacts that we receive. So that'll be something as well that I'll be bringing to the board, I would imagine, very early next year for you all to also be involved in.
Thank you. I mean, this is something that comes up nearly every board meeting, and the board has asked for regular updates of the number of people who are registered online because of the level of concerns. And again, the customer services centre have been so helpful in answering a growing number of queries. But I think, as we've heard from the assistant pension manager in her update of the number of government initiatives, policies, reviews, etc., these are hitting the press. Just as I was parked in the car park, I was listening to a radio review telling people to get onto their pension fund and ask the scheme what they were doing about this, that and the other. And it does generate so much additional work, even though we have got the answers there. They still takes somebody to service the requests. And the board is so concerned and will continue to be concerned that the structures, the training and the volume of staff are there to respond, because we're very aware that critically we are under the microscope in terms of the government like never before, with the pension regulator being very clear about what we should and must do, and the ombudsman gearing up if we don't. So I think in terms of the administration, we're right, and the board is absolutely right to say this has got to be top priority and the staff have got to be supported. And anything that the board can do to support that, we will continue to do. But thank you for bringing that up. Okay, another one for February then, on the February agenda. All day board meeting. Okay. So oh golly, we've got Old Faithful coming up on the next item. Now, Liz, this is your first report, isn't it, in your reconstituted role?
It is, yes. I'm taking this report for Lisa. Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is the Pension Board's terms of reference. It is reviewed annually, and I've attached as an appendix to this report a draft of a revised terms of reference for the board to consider and provide feedback on. You'll see it does say that it's shown in yellow highlighting, I think because of the printing that doesn't show, so I will go through with you. I'll break that down, and the updates that have been made. It's probably just important to say at this stage that this review of the terms of reference is a little bit more in depth, and that's because as a pension fund we've taken on board the new pension regulators general code and the requirements within that code. We're satisfied that the terms of reference that have been presented to you today are compliant, will meet the requirements set out within the code, without being too prescriptive and too restrictive on what the board might be able to do. So I'll go through them in detail. Obviously happy to take any comments as we're going through. So first of all, just to say that at section 3, at page 232, the final paragraph, I've added in just to be specific of the duties of the chair of the board. So this is to ensure compliance with what's set out with the general code. At paragraph section 4, the top of page 233, this is just setting out specifically that board members must be able to demonstrate their capacity to attend and complete the necessary preparation for meetings and participate in training as required. And it's just basically stating that in the event of consistent non-attendance by any board members, the tenure of that membership should be reviewed by the other board members. So it's just adding in a bit more governance into that and making sure that that's clear. Section 5 at page 234, I've added in some information about the procedure for the appointment of the board chair and about notification of appointments. Just things that were happening, but they weren't documented within the terms of reference. So I've made sure that that's added in. Section 7, just added a little bit more into the section around quorum. You know, if during the meeting there is a number of board members that is not quorum, the meeting can be postponed. Any member can tell the chair that there is not a quorum present, and if the meeting is postponed, the chair will decide when the board will deal with any business which remains outstanding. If the board does not set a date, if the chair does not set a date, the board will deal with it at their next ordinary meeting. And under section 8, I've just added a little bit more to strengthen sort of the narrative around decision making, making sure that that's clear, and that we've got robust procedures in place when it comes to any decision making of the board. And finally, at section 10, on page 236, I've added in, there's a third paragraph which just talks about the training strategy being established and maintained, which is for both the committee and the board, and that strategy addresses the knowledge and understanding requirements that apply to board members. You'll also see that we've added in a paragraph regarding board members being satisfied that they have the appropriate degree of knowledge and understanding to enable them to properly exercise their duties, and the requirement to undertake an annual personal training needs assessment and regularly review any gaps in that knowledge and skills. So those they're the only key changes that I made. As I say, I'm satisfied that is compliant with the general code, but happy to take any further comments or have any discussion, any areas of concern or change that the board may require.
Can I just precede this discussion by saying I think it's really important that we get everything on the table for this review, and the proposal is we don't review this annually, because I think it's taking up board time at a time where, well, and officer time, where in terms of the different agendas that we've got to deal with, this is one that is procedural, really. So my hope is that we can at least agree, and I don't know whether I've gone through this, Liz, but I can't see anywhere where we actually agree to review over these terms of reference over a different period. But my hope is that we move this from annually to 3 years, because I think it needs to happen. We just need to stop having this effectively every 4 meetings, which is what we do.
Yeah, I don't think it's set out specifically in the terms of reference, but I do agree that that unless there is a material change that requires a review, an interim review, that I think it would be more appropriate to the governance, the board governance documents to be on a cycle of triennial
Yeah.
cycles every 3 years as opposed to annually, unless, like I said, there's a change in guidance or regulations or something that we feel it's worthy of a
Yes.
review.
I think the board has to be mindful that an annual review means that every 4 meetings we review this, which seems heavy for this policy. I have got some comments on the actual text. I'm looking at Jane and whether or not there are any things on here that we need to look at from your perspective.
I don't think so, Linda. I think I welcome the clarification that that Liz has put in there, but nothing specific that I think we need to really focus on.
Okay, right. Can I just bring to, there's a number of things that I want. Do you want me to go through them now, Liz?
Yes.
I think there's something here, well, 1.3, I beg your pardon, in your report, you've said about the terms of reference. If we could actually put in the terms of reference that document would be reviewed if the board has so agreed it every 3 years. So that becomes a defining criteria. One of the things we were going to, as a board, review this in a workshop, because I think what my concern is about this is the period of tenure for the chair. I think appropriately, and perhaps even more so, the role of the chair needs to be clarified. But we also need to be mindful that if we are giving extra duties, that needs to be balanced against the tenure of the chair, because I think to have a chair a potential change of chair every 4 meetings is not good governance. And what I would say is whoever that chair might be, and you know, I'm in the unfortunate position of having to suggest this myself, but I do think that whoever that board chair might be, there should be a period of 3 years to allow that role to fulfill itself, much as the way we've actually got for board members. And indeed, I think ideally the chair and the board member term should be coterminous, but staggered, so that we've got, you know, some succession planning within there. So that's one thing that I would like to suggest. I'm very aware that our quorum is a problem for us, and today we nearly didn't have a board meeting because we are 1 board member short. Now, due to some flexibility, that could be either an employer or a member representative. And I'm encouraged and reassured that an advertising campaign is going to go out to get that seat filled as soon as possible. That's good news. But I think we may need to look at that quorum section still further to be very clear, because I mean, I think people who've got advance notice of giving their apologies, it's really, really helpful if they can do it, rather than everybody turning up for a meeting and finding out, you know, that we may or may not have sufficient people to run that meeting. So I think we need to maybe just look at that again, Liz, whether or not we can put something in about that.
I think we'll just need to check if there's some regulatory requirements with regards
That would be very
membership and
helpful.
attendance,
That
because
would be
there
very
are
helpful.
some parts of it that are set out in the regulations.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
But it, you know, if we actually can. And I think under the appointment of the board chair, I would just ask for clarification. The chair shall have previous experience of being, should that mean a pension board member, or should it just mean any board member?
Yeah, that's saying the pension board member.
Right, could we put
Yeah,
that?
can put
Could
that
we
in.
put that in? Pleased to see that we've got the 4 meetings a year in. That's excellent. The other thing in terms of board skills, and it's maybe not in the terms of reference, but do we need to actually look at the outcomes of the training that people do online in our annual report? Because that would just pick it up then, wouldn't it? That board members have completed X number of modules or something, so that we could do that, because I'm very aware that we need to be demonstrative in terms of what we've done, not just leaving it up to the individuals.
I think that the newly published guidance on pension fund report and accounts says specifically about putting training completed into that. So that's maybe something that's been added or will need to be added anyway. Certainly something we can look at with a table of training completed. It is in there, yes. I thought that was the case. It is in there. Are you asking for, as well as training that's delivered, like in person or virtual training, for any online training
Yes.
that's, yeah,
Because that-
recorded? No, so that's,
It
yeah.
isn't currently in, but I think in terms of the volume of modules that there
Yeah.
are, I think it would be good to
Mm.
actually see and show how many modules have been completed year on year. It doesn't need to be an individual name and shame, but I think if we could know, for example, that X number of board members completed Y number of modules, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, we can start doing that, Chair. I suppose what we've done in terms of the approach so far is, you know, clearly those modules are available and hopefully will be helpful. But to some extent, this will kind of link into what we'll be talking about in the future about the knowledge skills assessment is. To a large extent, it's down to the individuals to decide on what training they feel that they need, because, you know, clearly if you've got someone who's relatively new to the board or the committee, there will be more useful for them to get a basic level of knowledge. But for people that have been, around for donkey's years and have seen it all before and whatever, they might feel quite comfortable, particularly if they go to any other events or attend online events. So the modules might be there as a kind of supplement to that, but are less important. But I think, one thing that it does do is it helps us demonstrate that everyone has done a certain minimum level of training. So we do include some information in the annual report. It's a question of, what level of detail do we go to on that?
And I also am aware that we're treading a fine line between getting a fully skilled and trained board and being off-putting for what is a voluntary role. We don't want to put people off, but equally, if they are going to come forward for that role, and we hope they will do, that they are fully committed and are fully skilled. And I think it's that really delicate balance, isn't it, between too much and not enough. I think if we can actually in some way demonstrate what's been done, I think that would be to good effect. Okay. I'm aware also that we've got 2 board members that are not here today. Have we got any comments from them on any of this or any of the reports?
No. What I would propose, Linda, and this is what I've done in previous years, when we've brought this draft terms of reference for approval by the board before it goes to committee, what we've done is, if any change has been suggested, I've updated that, and then I've recirculated it to all the board members just for a final, approval. And then we've got that document and we can say this is when it was done. So I can update the document based on the comments that you've made. I was just going to go through and just double check that we've got all those and that for the board who are in attendance are in agreement with that. So so under the section appointment of board chair, you'd like that updated to say the chair of the board will be elected by the board on a 3-year basis.
On a term of 3 years.
On a term of 3 years. And to add in the sentence below, experience of being a pension board member.
Yeah.
That's okay. Under section 7, forum, to check regulatory requirements, to see whether or not we've got any scope to change that quorum and whether or not we think that's appropriate. I think my only comment would be that I think that within the regulations, there is an expectation that the board will be made up of an equal number of employer and scheme member representatives.
Yeah.
Therefore, I think it's appropriate to set at least one employer and one scheme member representative to be
Oh, yeah.
at a board meeting. And without looking at the regulations, I would recommend that you don't change that. What you're asking is, do we still need 3 or can we accept 2? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm not. Quite the opposite. I think as it's read, it's good.
Right.
And three is,
Okay.
I think the problem is that we need to actually get board recruitment and,
Yes, we
get
do.
up to numbers.
Yeah.
But I think what I am a little bit worried about is the giving of apologies. Now, that might not be in terms of reference, but I think it might be somewhere else that we just have got a bit of, you know, where board members know they can't make a meeting, that we don't all arrive in a room and find out that we're not quorum. Okay, so particularly I think at the moment, until we actually get another member on board, we are riding a bit of a roller coaster in terms of board meetings.
So the last change that you're asking is under the knowledge and skills that we add some wording just to confirm that the training that's undertaken will be reported in the pension fund report and accounts, and that will include any online training undertaken. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure that having it, the actual, you know, detail of that in the terms of reference,
We
but
can leave
the
it
annual
very-
report, I think,
Okay.
is maybe the place where some sort of reflection of what's happened would go.
So then I'll make those changes.
Yeah, there's one more.
Oh, was the one more?
Sorry, I've forgotten this one too. I've marked it on my copy. The work plan for each year. It's whether or not we can actually make a work plan and set dates at the same time as the pension committee also do their work plan. Because I think in terms of committee dates have gone into 2026, and it would just be quite helpful if we could coordinate board and committee dates. And I think that's probably helpful to officers as much as it is to board members, so that we've got a read through on those dates.
So are you wanting, are you proposing then that the meeting dates, when we're proposing them now, which is only during the calendar year of 2025, that you would carry from 2025, you would do it in line with what the committee is, which is more a municipal year, if that's the right term you do?
Yeah. I mean,
Is that your request
I
then?
think my request is at the time the committee set their dates, we set ours. So pension board and committee set dates at the same time for the same overlapping period, if that's possible.
Yeah, I think, John, you might be able to help us with this. I think the pension board meeting arrangements haven't been in line with the dates of all of the other committee meetings, because the pension board meetings are slightly different in terms of you know, this kind of their kind of legal origins and whatever. So that might be a reason, but you know, I think it would obviously make forward planning a little easier if the two were in line.
The current 2025-26 calendar has been set. It was set in November at full council. So if you were looking ahead, you would actually not only be setting your 2025 dates, you'd be looking to do your 2026 today, or at some nearer point, and leaving it till next December.
But would you only be setting 2026 up until April 26? For the 2026, have you only got the committee dates up to April 26?
The dates are set up until the next annual general meeting in May 2026. So we run from April, May 25 to April, May 26.
So all we're adding in then, Linda, because we're already got the dates up to December 25, would be the first quarter meeting of 2026, because after that it's not set again.
Correct. I think there's a January and a March, or is it a January and a May committee set for 2026? Something like that. Yes, for pensions committee. I mean, I think it's more the principle rather than the actual dates. But the other thing that I would say is the actual dates that we've got for 2025. To be absolutely honest, because of differing school holidays, whether or not we could possibly look at other dates for the February and May meetings.
Yeah, well, that's someone next.
Oh, is that next one? Sorry. But I think it's just the principle, and hopefully that will be a benefit to officers too, so that the meetings can be appropriately spaced, and so that one feeds through to the other.
Yeah, I think what might be best, I don't think we need to make any changes within these terms of reference. However, I think if myself and Tom speak to John and we see how we can maybe, when we agree the work plan and the dates, that we can run it a bit further forward every year, or maybe just resync it so it's in line. So it might still be that you do it every year. It's just that the timing of it might be different.
Yeah, and just reflect that in the first paragraph of 13, because that will then update that
Yeah, well, I'll speak to Tom and John separately, and then we can arrange how we're going to do that. Okay.
Okay. The other thing is, we're not on that one. We're not currently sending out board meeting minutes as drafts to everybody. But I mean, is that what you're suggesting? Draft minutes of each meeting were recorded and circulated to all board members and representative funds within 15 working days after the meeting.
I think the phrase means draft minutes as in the minutes that you will get at your next meeting, because they're draft minutes until they're signed off.
Can I just say, I didn't think we were actually doing that at the moment, though. That is a change.
No, the draft minutes, once they've been consulted on with officers, are then posted onto the pension board website for information.
Oh, that's
Those
what it
minutes are
means.
then submitted to the next pension board meeting, where they are signed off and become the official minutes.
But we've actually got down here that they're circulated to all, and they're not, are they?
That's an action we can pick up.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's just
because
so
I
that
think
our
that's,
actions then
I think that's a
terms of
good action
reference.
to make sure that that's
Happy
correct,
with
as
that?
opposed to they
Yeah.
will still appear on the website as so they're not being signed off.
No.
But we can circulate them as well.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
Happy with that.
Yes,
Thank
that's
you.
fine.
Right. Okay. So the action from this item is that you'll get all of that written up, and a final version will be going out, particularly for comments on the two absent.
I'll get
board
that
members.
next week out to all the board members.
Thank
And what
you.
I'll do is, where the changes that have been recommended in this meeting, I'll just highlight them in a different colour to say that this has been updated, follow this discussion, so it's clear which were the
Fantastic.
existing changes and which are the further changes. If everybody's in approval, then I just need a response. I can get them signed off, and that's it. And
That's
then
great.
we'll put it on a 3-year cycle.
Thank you.
Right.
That's excellent. Thank you. And within your 6 days, you've got your second report, Liz, item 11.
I have, yeah. In the interest of time, I'm conscious it is only 15 minutes to the end of the meeting. So this report is bringing to the board the proposed work plan and meeting dates for 2025. We're asking that the board considers and agrees the items to be included on the work plan, and agrees the dates of the meeting, and reviews the board content which is on the website, which is a good governance action to be carried out anyway every year to make sure that's all up to date. So attached at, well, it's not as an attendees, but it is in a way, it's on page 242 and 243. these are the, this is the proposed meeting dates for 2025 and the work plan. So these are areas that the officers feel that they'll want to bring to the board on these dates. We appreciate that the February meeting is a little bit heavy. That is really to do with a lot of the policies that are, or strategies that must be considered and reviewed annually, and we bring them for consideration of the board ahead of the committee meeting. So that's timing. We will, in the interest of trying to spread that work out, we'll have a look at whether any of those policies or strategies may not need to be reviewed annually. Let's try and look at our policy cycle. Can we extend that in any of these areas? Are we just repeating, like you say, looking at things once every 4 meetings, wherever we can, but in a way, a lot of the areas that are set out at certain dates are really because there is a statutory duty for us to do that, and it's just in line with what we need to do for committee. In some other areas where it may seem a little bit light, it probably won't be when we get to that meeting. We've got so much going on. Obviously, we're going to have more actions from the current Fit for the Future review, what's going to happen from governance point of view, looking at the risk register, more deep dives, all those areas. So we'll build those in. Is there anything that the board feels they would like to look at that's not already put into the work plan? Anything in specifically that they would have expected to see? And do we need to consider any of the meeting dates in light of your comments already, Linda, about perhaps they're not fitting in very well with some of your own other arrangements? So I'm going to hand that over to the board.
Yeah, can I just say I feel very uncomfortable doing this because I you know, in terms of, unfortunately my holidays are pre-booked more than 1 year in advance, but if somebody else has got problems with this, and I'm aware that there's half term and school holiday issues on 2 of these dates, that's fine, but I don't just want this to be about my availability. That's not how a board should work. So, you know, if we change the dates, I'd be very grateful, but otherwise, you know, I think the biggest issue is just, for me, it's just about getting the board and the committee aligned, just so we've got that feed through from one to another. Okay, thanks.
Have you got your dates that you'd like to propose, Linda?
Oh,
You want me
well, I can do.
would you like me to propose them for you?
I just feel deeply uncomfortable about this because it feels like it shouldn't feel like this really. But if I've got the dates, certainly for 25, 26, to be absolutely honest, I wouldn't book my holidays when I book them.
No, that's
So
fine.
it's
Yes.
that way round. But the 7th in particular of February would be good. The 14th is the second option. And I'm away the 20th.
So the 7th or the 14th of February.
7th is my
25.
first choice. The
Right.
14th is the second. I don't know how that fits with Jane, but
I think it might be Tom as well, really, because obviously Tom sits across 2 pension funds
Exactly.
and has a very busy diary. Very busy.
and I'm away the 20th to the 31st
Yes.
of May.
Ah, yeah. So you're proposing the 6th of June as an alternative?
If that's okay, but as I say, it's got to be okay with everybody else. I mean,
I think, Chair, I mean, we can test these dates out, and I think in terms of the dates and the work plan, I think obviously, you know, the intention is to plan ahead with it, but nothing set in stone. So, you know, we'll try and be as accommodative as we can.
And we do try and on an annual cycle, we try and keep those dates very close. So often by just a day or 2, they'll change year on year. Taking into account, yes, everybody has very busy diaries. There's an awful lot going on. What we could do as well is when we send out for everybody's approval some revised dates, we could also propose some dates for 2026. So we provisionally have got them in the diaries. we'll do that. Obviously, there won't be a work plan attached at that stage. It is just giving everybody a heads up, and that might then mean that we can avoid not having enough of a board members at meetings. And
Can I
that's
just say,
okay.
having cancelled 7 holidays this year for health reasons, the 2 that I have got booked next year, I really don't want to cancel.
That's fine. I'm sure we can accommodate and we can work around. So I'll send this out. I'll attach it to an email with some proposed revised dates, and if everybody could just respond, and we'll try and get a consensus on that. And we'll check with John on room availability as well. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your flexibility on this. Okay. So, hang on, I've lost my thread here. Are we on
Page 244.
Are we on item 12 now? And Liz, you're talking us through the board training programme now.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. So again, quickly, this is the training strategy that's been reviewed. This is another area that's reviewed annually. Perhaps that's maybe not going to be necessary going forward. These are areas we're going to look at to see if we can be more streamlined with the governance documents around board and seeing how often we need to review these. However, it is very timely to review the training strategy because it has been reviewed and updated to take account of the requirements of the general code from the regulator, and this does now reflect the latest position on the training requirements. That said, we know that there's possibly going to be some more changes this year with the aligning committee requirements with board, so it may require a little bit more of a small update just to reflect that later in 2025. However, for now, what I've attached is a proposed programme of training, and to ask the board, are there any training requirements that specifically you may want? I know that the board have been asked to complete the LGPS learning assessment. At the moment, we don't have the outcome from that. We're still awaiting that to come through from Hymans. That can feed into our programme of training next year. We can look at that as soon as it's arrived and put forward some proposals. So for now, we've under paragraph 4, 4.3, we've made some suggested training that we might want to look at for 2025. One of those is the triennial valuation. Obviously, that'll be in full swing next year, and it's always an area that we would provide training to the board, and we may ask Hymans to deliver some of that training to board and committee. So that will be fitted into our programme next year. And also anything emerging from the governance review and the consultation fit for the future and the pooling requirements that Tom's going to be doing. I've also, since, and it's not narrated in this report, but I would like to do some work on the risk register and involve the board in that, perhaps a workshop to look at how we manage risk, our risk management role, and look at do a full scale review of the risk register to make sure that it's fit for purpose. Going on to the training strategy, which is attached to Appendix 1, there are some changes that have been made, just really specifically saying that the strategy applies to committee and board. They're expected to continually demonstrate their own personal commitment to training. We know that this is becoming a greater expectation. We know that this is going to come out from the recent consultation. There is a greater requirement for all board and committee members to have the appropriate training and to be able to demonstrate their commitment to that, and that there may be actions taken where there's not compliance with that. So we've reiterated that into the policy. I've just added in that our training strategy does take into account the knowledge and understanding requirements that the Pension Regulators General Code sets out, and that took effect from March 24. So this strategy is updated to reflect that. And we're reiterating again, expecting to use some of the online training that's available, including the Regulators Toolkit for Public Service Schemes and the Online Learning Academy provided by Hymans. And that there is a requirement that board members are completing that training when any new board members specifically. So it's just really, if there's any comments, anything you would like updating in the training strategy, and any suggestions for the training for 2025.
Okay, any comments? Just a couple from me. Under programme of training, it's a question really. All members, including substitutes? I thought we weren't allowing substitutes.
That's because this is a joint committee and board strategy. So this training strategy is a joint one for the committee and the board.
Great question. Do committee have substitutes?
They can,
Really?
yeah.
Oh, right, that's a new one for me.
They do, Chair. I mean, one of the requirements for a substitute is they have to have some induction training before they can attend the committee meetings, because, you know, it's sort of seated in the view that, you know, committee members need to have a level of knowledge to participate in the discussions.
Indeed, right.
So I
okay.
think at the moment we don't have substitutes on the board, do we?
No,
But,
no,
you know, yeah.
it's not. There aren't any for the board.
Well, but I think specifically you've said in the board terms of reference that there aren't any substitutes. If I remember, I can't remember where you said it, but you've definitely said it. But no, that was it. That was a new one for me. So thank you for that.
It might just be a simple change of that wording, Liz, to move including substitutes to after pensions committee, so that it's relevant to pensions committee and not board.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, no, that's fine, Jane. I can do that definitely. Yeah.
Thanks.
Right. And that was it. That was it, really. It was the only point.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's item 12. So any other items? 13, any other items which the chair decides are urgent by reason of special circumstances, which must be specified? There's only one. Have a lovely, lovely Christmas between all the work that you're doing on preparing for consultations and reviews and all the other good stuff that you're doing. So thank you all very much for your attendance. And I declare the meeting closed at